March 15, 1944, Pratt Army Airfield, Kansas. A harrowing incident unfolded as Captain Robert Morgan watched, helpless, as flames violently erupted from the No. 3 engine of his B-29 Superfortress. The formidable Wright R-3350 engine, a colossal 2,200 horsepower testament to American engineering prowess, was catastrophically self-immolating at a scorching 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Dense plumes of ebony smoke billowed from the engine, cowling as frantic ground personnel, clutching fire extinguishers, sprinted desperately towards the colossal aircraft. This alarming event marked the fourth engine fire to plague this singular airfield within the span of just 1 week. Despite Captain Morgan's immediate activation of the emergency protocols, killing the fuel mixture and engaging the fire suppression system, nothing transpired. The integrated extinguisher bottles, meticulously designed to inundate the engine compartment with carbon dioxide, proved utterly incapable of reaching the insidious source of the blaze. The inferno, originating deep within the rear cylinders, was effectively shielded, trapped behind intricately designed baffles and cooling fins where the extinguishing agent simply could not penetrate. With a guttural cry of "Everybody out," Morgan commanded his crew, who executed their evacuation in an astonishing 45 seconds flat. Their swift exit was a testament to countless practice drills, which had ingrained the procedure into their very muscle memory. By the time emergency vehicles reached the scene, the magnificent $600,000 bomber had been irrevocably consumed, a total loss. The intense heat had utterly compromised the integrity of the main wing spar, melting through its core. The entire aircraft would be relegated to the scrap heap, stripped for salvageable components. We invite you to stay with us and watch the enthralling conclusion of this narrative. We would be immensely grateful for your kind like and subscription. Please also share a comment about your origin and your thoughts on the compelling topic of this video. Yet the truly chilling aspect of this particular catastrophe was its context. This was not a casualty inflicted by enemy forces in distant skies, but a destructive event occurring within the placid confines of Kansas during a routine training exercise. The B-29 had not even ventured beyond American airspace, and this grim tableau was being replicated with alarming frequency across the nation. At the nearby Smoky Hill Army Airfield, another B-29 succumbed to flames on the tarmac. Walker Field, also in Kansas, witnessed 2 additional Superfortresses ignite during engine run-ups, critical pre-flight checks. Most tragically, at Great Bend, a Superfortress suffered a catastrophic explosion during its takeoff roll, claiming the lives of all 11 crew members before the colossal machine could even ascend into the heavens. The official figures painted a true devastating picture of the program's initial challenges. Out of the initial consignment of 175 B-29 Superfortresses provided to the Army Air Forces, a staggering 16 had been utterly incinerated, reduced to smoldering wrecks. An additional 47 aircraft had endured significant engine conflagrations, necessitating extensive repairs or write-offs. This flagship aircraft, representing America's most ambitious and costly weapons endeavor, surpassing even the monumental expenditure of the Manhattan Project, was plagued by an engine failure rate of an astonishing 35%. For General Henry Hap Arnold, the commanding general of the Army Air Forces, this unfolding crisis represented an existential nightmare. He had personally assured President Roosevelt that these advanced B-29s would be actively engaged in bombing operations over Japan by June 1944. However, at the prevailing, alarming rate of attrition, it became painfully clear that the Superfortress program was on track to claim more American aircrew lives through its inherent training accidents than would ever be lost to direct enemy engagement. What remained entirely unknown, utterly beyond the foresight of anyone present as Captain Morgan witnessed the agonizing demise of his bomber, was the profoundly unconventional source from which the ultimate resolution to this debilitating crisis would emerge. It would not originate from the esteemed ranks of Wright Aeronautical Corporation's most brilliant engineers, nor from the innovative minds within Boeing's celebrated design department. Even the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, ENACE, the preeminent institution where the nation's foremost aeronautical specialists were assiduously striving to unravel this enigma, would not yield the answer. Instead, the pivotal breakthrough would be conceived by a 38-year-old aircraft mechanic, possessing merely a 7th-grade education, who had dedicated a decade and a half prior to the conflict to the installation of residential plumbing systems throughout Cleveland, Ohio. His name was Tony Valador, and his seemingly preposterous concept, rooted in his understanding of fluid dynamics and pipes, stood poised to rescue the entirety of the imperiled B-29 program. Time was rapidly elapsing. Imperial Japan was fortifying its defenses with increasing urgency, while America's most advanced bombers continued to incinerate on domestic tarmacs. Tony Valador was on the verge of proposing a remedy so elegantly straightforward, so disarmingly self-evident, that the highly credentialed engineers would undoubtedly find it ludicrous and dismiss him outright. The R-350 duplex cyclone engine had been conceptualized as the zenith of radial engine technology, designed to be the most potent power plant of its kind ever constructed. Comprising 18 cylinders meticulously configured in 2 distinct rows, it boasted an impressive 2,200 horsepower, theoretically endowing the B-29 with the capability to attain speeds of 350 miles per hour at an altitude of 30,000 feet. While its specifications appeared truly superb on blueprints, its operational reality proved to be a perilous snare, a veritable harbinger of disaster. At the heart of the engine's catastrophic propensity lay an intractable issue of thermal management, particularly concerning the rear bank of cylinders. Each R-350 power unit incorporated 9 cylinders positioned in the forward array and an equivalent 9 in the aft section. The forward cylinders benefited from an abundant supply of cooling air, with ram air surging through the engine, cowling at a formidable 200 miles per hour. Conversely, the rear cylinders, regrettably situated in the aerodynamic wake of their forward counterparts, suffered from a critical deprivation of adequate airflow. Under routine operational conditions, the thermal readings within these rear cylinders would ascend to an alarming 550 degrees Fahrenheit. During demanding high-power maneuvers, such as the critical phase of takeoff, these temperatures would violently surge, reaching peaks of 650 degrees Fahrenheit. The aluminum alloy cylinder heads fundamentally commenced warping at a mere 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Exhaust valves, vital for engine function, would invariably succumb to failure at 575 degrees Fahrenheit, and at the critical threshold of 600 degrees Fahrenheit, an entire cylinder was prone to seizing, resulting in the piston becoming immobilized, while the crankshaft relentlessly continued its rotation at an intense 2,800 revolutions per minute. The immediate consequences of such a catastrophic seizure were predictably ruinous. Connecting rods would violently fracture, pistons would forcefully breach the cylinder walls, and searing hot oil would atomize across incandescent metal surfaces. Compounding the disaster, the magnesium alloy engine cases would then spontaneously combust, generating an inferno burning at an unimaginable 5,600 degrees Fahrenheit, a temperature sufficient to liquefy the aircraft's crucial aluminum wing spar in a mere 90 seconds. The B-29's integrated fire suppression system, designed for external engine fires, proved utterly ineffectual as the conflagration raged internally, rendering the extinguishing agent incapable of penetrating to its source. The highly skilled engineers at Boeing meticulously explored every conceivable modification. Their initial attempts included augmenting the dimensions of the cooling air intake, a measure that regrettably yielded no discernible improvement, as the rear cylinders persistently suffered from excessive thermal buildup. Subsequently, they implemented larger oil coolers, which offered only a negligible enhancement in performance, far from resolving the fundamental issue. Further efforts involved a complete re-engineering of the cowl flaps, the movable panels situated at the aft section of the engine, cowling, crucial for regulating cooling airflow. However, this revised design inadvertently generated such substantial aerodynamic drag that pilots were unable to fully deploy the flaps during the critical takeoff phase without jeopardizing vital airspeed, thereby rendering the modification impractical. In an effort to unravel the perplexing issue, Wright Aeronautical dispatched a dedicated contingent of their most accomplished engineers for a thorough investigation. Their comprehensive analysis revealed a critical flaw: the cylinder baffles, which were slender aluminum sheets, precisely engineered to channel cooling air across the cylinder heads, possessed inadequate clearance. A minuscule gap, barely half an inch wide, existed between these baffles and the engine's cooling fins, a constriction that severely impeded the efficient passage of vital airflow. The immediate, seemingly straightforward resolution appeared to be self-evident: enlarge the clearance, undertake a comprehensive redesign of the baffles, and thus afford the cooling air an unhindered path for circulation. Yet, a formidable structural impediment quickly became apparent. The entirety of the engine cowling had been intricately engineered and fabricated precisely to accommodate the prevailing baffle configuration. Altering the baffles would necessitate a complete overhaul of the cowling system. Consequently, modifying the cowling would, in turn, mandate significant revisions to the fundamental wing structure. Ultimately, any alteration to the wing structure would demand a full-scale redesign of the entire B-29 aircraft itself. Boeing's projections indicated that such an extensive engineering undertaking would consume an estimated 18 months and incur a staggering cost of $50 million to integrate these modifications across the entire production line. General Arnold, however, was operating under severe time constraints. 18 months was an unthinkable luxury, and even 18 weeks proved far too long. The inaugural B-29 combat sorties were firmly slated for June 5, 1944, leaving a mere 12 weeks until the critical deadline. The National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, the esteemed precursor to what would later become NASA, subsequently joined the collaborative effort. In June 1944, NACA transported a B-29 to its state-of-the-art aircraft engine research laboratory in Cleveland, Ohio. There, specialized teams of engineers meticulously operated the engines within their immense altitude wind tunnel, meticulously replicating flight conditions at 30,000 feet. Their findings unequivocally corroborated the prevailing understanding: the persistent and insufficient airflow reaching the rear cylinders was indeed the root cause. Nevertheless, the unanimous expert consensus reached a stark conclusion: the issue, by its very nature, was fundamentally intractable without embarking on an exhaustive redesign of the entire engine unit. The R-350, they determined, was inherently overpowered, producing an insurmountable quantity of heat within an excessively compact configuration. In essence, the very principles of thermodynamics appeared to be fundamentally arrayed against any immediate, practical solution. By September of 1944, the predicament had escalated to a truly desperate state. Ultimately, a staggering 414 B-29s would be tragically lost throughout the duration of World War II. A mere 147 of these losses were attributable to direct enemy engagement. The remaining 267 aircraft, representing nearly two-thirds of the total attrition, succumbed to devastating engine fires and systemic mechanical malfunctions. A profoundly unsettling reality that two-thirds of the losses were due to the aircraft's own power plants. The 20th Air Force found itself in the unenviable position of losing these magnificent bombers at a pace exceeding Boeing's production capacity. Morale among the crews plummeted, giving way to widespread terror. Pilots grimly christened the B-29 the flying funeral pyre. So profound was the apprehension that some aircrews actively sought transfers to B-17s and B-24s, older, slower, and demonstrably less capable aircraft, simply because those venerable machines did not possess the unsettling tendency to spontaneously combust over friendly skies. From Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, to the NACA laboratory in Cleveland, and at Boeing's expansive facility in Wichita, the nation's foremost aviation intellects were diligently grappling with this seemingly insurmountable challenge. Yet the unanimous verdict echoed relentlessly: no viable solution existed, not without a complete reinitiation of the entire design process. Unbeknownst to these luminaries of aeronautical engineering, in a humble maintenance hangar situated at Pratt Army Airfield, a skilled mechanic whose prior career had involved the installation of copper plumbing lines in the basements of Cleveland residences, was intently scrutinizing an R-350 engine, his thoughts deeply immersed in the principles of water pressure. Antonio "Tony" Valador, with his unassuming demeanor and practical background, was far from anyone's conventional image of an aircraft engineer. Born in 1906 within the vibrant Little Italy district of Cleveland, Tony's formal education concluded prematurely at the age of 14, as he left school to contribute to his family's economic welfare. His father operated a modest plumbing enterprise, primarily focused on residential contracts, the installation of kitchen sinks, the repair of malfunctioning toilets, and the intricate task of threading water lines through the often uncooperative structures of aged homes. Tony acquired his trade through arduous, first-hand experience, enduring the discomfort of frozen knuckles, navigating cramped basements, and ingeniously devising methods to route essential piping through seemingly impenetrable conduits. By the time he reached his 20th year, he had established himself as one preeminent problem solvers in the city of Cleveland. Whenever water ceased its flow, whenever inexplicable drops in pressure occurred across different floors, or when a heating system manifested perplexing cold zones, Tony was invariably the individual summoned to diagnose and rectify the underlying cause. The fundamental principle that Tony had intuitively grasped through years of practical application, was the profound significance of understanding fluid dynamics, or flow. Water, he recognized, operates independently of theoretical blueprints. Its inherent nature dictates that it will always seek the path of least resistance. Therefore, if one intends to direct the movement of water to a specific destination, the approach is not one of brute force. Instead, one must subtly guide it, meticulously engineering a conduit where the act of flowing becomes inherently simpler and more natural than any alternative. Upon the outbreak of war in 1941, Tony, then 35 years of age, found himself beyond the typical age for combat deployment, but perfectly suited for the vital war effort on the home front. He sought employment with Curtiss Wright, holding the astute belief that his extensive practical experience with piping systems and the intricate behavior of fluid flow could potentially be transferable to the demanding field of aircraft manufacturing. He was subsequently assigned to the critical role of engine maintenance at Pratt Army Airfield. Tony, remarkably, possessed no prior professional experience with aircraft. His entire theoretical understanding of internal combustion engines stemmed from an intensive, albeit brief, 3-week training curriculum. However, he possessed an unparalleled mastery of pipes and an innate comprehension of flow dynamics. And when he meticulously examined the R3350 engine, truly scrutinizing its complexities with the discerning eye a seasoned plumber applies to a malfunctioning water system, he perceived a crucial element that had eluded the highly educated engineers. In September of 1944, a mechanic named Tony discovered a fundamental flaw that eluded the most brilliant engineering minds. He was diligently performing his night shift duties, conducting routine maintenance on the third engine of a B-29 bomber. This particular aircraft had experienced an alarming overheat warning during a recent training sortie, prompting its pilot to promptly shut down the engine before any combustion could occur. Tony's crucial assignment involved meticulously inspecting the affected engine for any signs of damage. Upon carefully removing the outer cowling panels, his gaze settled on the rear cylinders, which bore unmistakable evidence of severe thermal stress. They were visibly blackened and distorted by excessive heat. The cooling fins, vital for dissipating heat, were conspicuously discolored, a definitive indicator of prolonged exposure to dangerously elevated temperatures. Tony then meticulously traced the theoretical pathway that cooling air was designed to follow within the engine's intricate structure. Conceptually, this air was intended to ingress through a frontal intake aperture in the cowling, pass over the foremost cylinders, and then, in principle, circulate between the rows of cylinders to effectively cool the rearward components. However, upon scrutinizing the actual physical configuration and geometry of the engine, Tony experienced a sudden, profound realization. The air, contrary to design intent, was not flowing efficiently. Rather, it was stagnating. The initial front cylinders efficiently heated the freshly incoming air to a scorching 300 degrees. This superheated air then attempted to migrate rearward, yet it encountered no viable escape route. Consequently, the air became ensnared within the confined space between the cylinder rows, progressively accumulating heat until it paradoxically began to warm, rather than cool, the very rear cylinders it was meant to protect. This perplexing scenario mirrored an earlier challenge Tony had faced while repairing the third-floor radiators in a residential building situated on Euclid Avenue. In that prior instance, the hot water, encountering minimal resistance, preferentially flowed directly to the second floor, thereby failing to ascend to the third floor due to an insufficient pressure differential to propel it upwards. The remedy in that situation had been elegantly straightforward. Tony had ingeniously installed a modest bypass pipe, skillfully redirecting a portion of the water flow to its intended destination. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. As Tony stood within the capacious maintenance hangar, his gaze fixed intently on the monumental $4 million aircraft engine, a pivotal thought materialized in his mind. What if I apply the same fundamental principle here? What if, instead of struggling to force cooling air through the labyrinthine interior of the engine, I devise a method to channel it around? He promptly committed his nascent concept to paper, sketching a rudimentary diagram on the reverse side of a maintenance log. His design envisioned a network of small pipes and specialized ducting, essentially a bypass system engineered to directly divert cooling air to the rear cylinders. This innovative approach would establish a dedicated, independent cooling pathway, one that circumvented the problematic reliance on airflow navigating the constricted spaces between the cylinder rows. The simplicity of his idea was striking, almost disarmingly so, a characteristic Tony intuitively understood would elicit strong opposition from the established engineering community. Tony dedicated the subsequent 3 nights to the clandestine construction of his prototype. He recognized that utilizing official bureaucratic channels, processes involving requisitioning specific parts, and securing formal engineering approval was entirely out of the question. He harbored no illusions about the likely reception. The highly credentialed engineers, upon considering his mere 7th-grade education and his background as a plumber, would undoubtedly dismiss his ideas with derision and summarily eject him from their offices. Consequently, Tony resorted to ingenious improvisation. He resourcefully salvaged lengths of aluminum tubing from a severely damaged B-29, an aircraft awaiting its inevitable fate in the salvage yard. From the welding shop, he discreetly borrowed a cutting torch. Employing a pair of tin snips, he skillfully modified the existing cylinder baffles, meticulously creating new apertures. He then meticulously fabricated a series of small aluminum ducts, which functioned essentially as conduits, purposefully routing cooling air around the front cylinders and directly to the rear. These ducts, crude in their appearance and hand-formed, were secured together with ordinary sheet metal screws and a robust, high-temperature sealant. Their rough, unrefined aesthetic unmistakably resembled an assemblage a plumber might hastily construct in a dimly lit basement workshop, precisely because that was their authentic origin. Nevertheless, the fundamental engineering principle underpinning his invention was undeniably sound. Rather than passively hoping that air would naturally traverse a complex and obstructive maze of internal engine components to reach the rear, Tony strategically placed ducts actively compelled the air along a specifically designated and unimpeded path. This approach mirrored the very essence of a water bypass line, the deliberate creation of a low-resistance conduit that delivers the essential flow precisely where it is most critically required. With meticulous effort, Tony successfully completed the installation on the evening of October 3, 1944. He had meticulously modified the right inboard engine of B-29 serial number 42-244605, a training aircraft that was already slated for an official engine test run the following morning. He maintained absolute discretion, refraining from informing anyone of his unauthorized intervention. His only formal action was to affix his signature to the maintenance report, which innocuously stated, "Cooling system inspection complete. Engine cleared for test." The subsequent morning, Captain James Wheeler was assigned the task of conducting the routine engine run-up. Adhering to standard operational procedures, he was to cycle the engine through various power settings, meticulously monitor temperature readings, and vigilantly check for any anomalies. Wheeler smoothly advanced the throttle, and the formidable R3350 engine surged to its full operational power, 2,800 revolutions per minute, generating an immense 2,200 horsepower. The resulting cacophony was utterly deafening, and the entire airframe vibrated intensely. Yet the rear cylinder temperature gauge, which typically ascended rapidly to 550 degrees within a mere 90 seconds, remained remarkably stable, holding steadfastly at 425 degrees. Captain Wheeler initially surmised that the temperature gauge itself must be malfunctioning. Driven by this suspicion, he prolonged the test, operating the engine at full power for an extended 5 minutes, a duration considerably longer than the standard protocol, and indeed potentially hazardous if a genuine problem were actually present. The subsequent readings remained startlingly consistent. The rear cylinder temperature registered 430 degrees, while the front cylinders indicated 410 degrees. Remarkably, the rear cylinders were now operating at a lower temperature than their frontal counterparts. Upon completing the prolonged test, Wheeler promptly shut down the engine and immediately reported his findings to the engineering officer. He conveyed his conviction that something's profoundly amiss with number 3. The temperature readings are frankly impossible. The gauge must be unequivocally faulty. In response, a specialized maintenance crew was dispatched to investigate the perplexing situation. It was during this thorough examination that Tony's ingenious modification was ultimately uncovered. When the engineering officer observed the crudely hand-fabricated aluminum ducts, he reacted with an explosive outburst of rage, demanding, "Who dared to authorize this? Who performed an unauthorized modification to a combat aircraft engine? This egregious act constitutes a court-martial offense." Tony was swiftly removed from his duties on the flight line and brought directly before Major Donald Peterson, who held the authoritative position of Chief of Aircraft Maintenance. Major Peterson's interrogation was direct and severe. "Did you modify that engine without proper authorization?" Tony's response was immediate and unequivocal. "Yes, sir." Peterson pressed further, emphasizing the gravity of the situation. "Do you comprehend that you could be facing serious criminal charges for unauthorized modifications to military aircraft?" Tony, however, remained resolute, offering his compelling defense, "Sir, the rear cylinders operated 60 degrees cooler. I possess a viable solution to this persistent overheating problem." Major Peterson regarded him with an intense, disbelieving stare. "You claim to have a solution, son? The National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NACA, has 50 highly skilled engineers dedicated to this very problem. Wright Aeronautical has deployed its entire design team, and Boeing has also committed substantial resources." Tony interjected respectfully but firmly. "With due deference, sir, I believe they're all overthinking the issue. Fundamentally, it's a plumbing problem. The air simply requires a dedicated flow path. I provided one. Peterson, dismissive of Tony's background, retorted, "You're merely a mechanic. You lack the requisite qualifications to—" Tony, undeterred, corrected him. "I am a plumber, sir. And in the field of plumbing, when a fluid fails to flow where it is needed, one introduces a bypass. That is precisely all I have done." Major Peterson meticulously reviewed the temperature logs from the test run, noting the indisputable data, a remarkable 60-degree reduction in temperature. Furthermore, the engine had sustained full power operation without any subsequent temperature escalation. Peterson, still grappling with the unexpected results, declared, "That? Impossible." Tony, seizing the moment, confidently requested, "Permission to conduct another test, sir. Allow me to definitively prove that it is not." On October 5, 1944, at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, Major Peterson, despite his lingering distrust of Tony's unconventional modification, found himself unable to disregard the compelling temperature data. He promptly forwarded the comprehensive test results to the authorities at Wright Field, accompanied by a concise yet impactful note. Mechanic-modified R3350 cooling system. Achieved 60 degrees temperature reduction. Recommend immediate evaluation. 2 days later, Tony found himself aboard a C-47 transport aircraft bound for Dayton, his hand-built aluminum ducts carefully contained within a canvas bag, much like a seasoned plumber carrying his essential tools to a job site. Upon his arrival at Wright Field, he was formally escorted to a conference room. There, an imposing assembly of 12 distinguished engineers from Wright Aeronautical, Boeing, NACA, and the Army Air Forces awaited his arrival. They were already aware of the so-called plumber's modification, and their collective demeanor conveyed a distinct lack of impressiveness. Colonel Curtis E. LeMay, the formidable commander of the B-29 program operating in the Pacific Theater, happened to be visiting Wright Field and decided to attend the meeting. LeMay possessed a legendary reputation for his utter intolerance of bureaucratic inefficiencies and pointless formalities. His paramount concern was the immediate need for B-29 aircraft that would not spontaneously ignite in flight. The identity of the individual who ultimately solved this critical problem was of no consequence to him. Dr. Harrison Evans, the esteemed chief aeronautical engineer from Wright Aeronautical, formally commenced the proceedings. Addressing Tony, he stated, "Sergeant Valador, we have thoroughly reviewed your temperature data. While the results presented are certainly intriguing, we harbor significant technical concerns regarding your overall approach." Tony promptly inquired, "What specific concerns, sir?" Dr. Evans elaborated, "To begin with, you have inadvertently created turbulent flow paths that fundamentally contravene established principles of aerodynamic cooling design. Our calculations indicate that the ducts you have installed actually diminish the total cooling airflow by approximately 8%. Tony countered simply, "But the rear cylinders are running cooler." Dr. Evans, visibly hesitant, responded, It's quite possibly a measurement error. It is conceivable that the thermocouples were improperly positioned after your modification." Tony then produced a second, irrefutable set of temperature logs. "I conducted 3 additional tests, sir," he asserted. "Using different thermocouples, the results were identical. The rear cylinders consistently registered temperatures 50 to 65 degrees Celsius cooler than the established baseline." At this juncture, an engineer from Boeing interjected, shifting the focus of the critique. Even if your data proves accurate, your modification is entirely impractical for mass production. Those hand-fabricated ducts would necessitate custom manufacturing. We simply cannot tool up for a solution of this nature across the entire B-29 fleet. Tony, ever pragmatic, questioned, "Why not? They are merely aluminum tubes. Any competent sheet metal shop can fabricate them," the engineer countered, "because they are not properly engineered. There is no accompanying stress analysis, no vibration testing, and no long-term durability assessment." Tony retorted sharply, "They are cooling ducts, not load-bearing structures." The room erupted into a cacophony of dissenting voices. "You fundamentally fail to comprehend the inherent complexity of these systems. These engines alone cost $35,000 each. We cannot simply permit mechanics to capriciously modify engines based on mere hunches," another voice added vehemently. "This is precisely the type of reckless, cowboy engineering that inevitably leads to fatalities." At this critical juncture, Colonel LeMay rose to his feet. An immediate and profound silence descended upon the room. "Gentlemen, silence!" LeMay commanded, his gaze then settling intently on Tony. "Sergeant, I have B-29s incinerating on Saipan. I have air crews refusing to fly, because they are more terrified of their own engines than they are of Japanese fighter aircraft. Now, are you genuinely asserting that you can resolve this dire problem with some basic aluminum tubes?" "Yes, sir," Tony affirmed. LeMay then turned his attention back to the assembled experts. "And these distinguished experts are informing me that your solution cannot possibly work because it lacks proper engineering validation. Is that an accurate summation?" "Yes, sir," Tony confirmed once more. LeMay then pivoted to Dr. Evans, his tone sharp and direct. "How long has Wright Aeronautical been diligently working on this persistent cooling problem?" Dr. Evans responded. "Since early 1943, Colonel. Approximately 20 months. 20 months, LeMay repeated, his voice laced with impatience. "And what concrete solutions have you actually implemented during this extensive period?" Dr. Evans stammered. We've introduced incremental improvements to cylinder head design, modified the baffle clearances within existing structural constraints, and optimized the cowl flap actuator schedule." LeMay pressed him relentlessly. "Has any of it actually worked?" A tense silence filled the room. "I asked you a direct question, Doctor. Has any of it worked?" Dr. Evans, clearly uncomfortable, finally conceded. Not to the degree we had originally hoped." A palpable tension hung in the air as the critical question was posed. Did it work? The response, delivered with a hint of disappointment, indicated a less than ideal outcome. Not to the degree we'd hoped. Colonel LeMay, his gaze fixed on the meticulous temperature logs, observed a stark contrast. He noted with a pointed emphasis that Sergeant Valador, working tirelessly in a humble maintenance hangar, had, in a single night, and utilizing only salvaged components, engineered a modification that yielded an impressive 60-degree of temperature reduction. With a decisive thud, LeMay dropped the incriminating logs onto the polished conference table, his voice cutting through the silence. He laid out an unequivocal directive. The assembled engineers were to adopt Sergeant Valador's ingenious, albeit rudimentary, design. Their mandate was to meticulously engineer it to professional standards, incorporating rigorous stress analysis, comprehensive vibration testing, and any other necessary evaluations. Furthermore, this refined solution was to be fast-tracked into full production, not within a protracted period of 20 months or even 20 weeks, but with an unprecedented urgency within a mere 20 days. A collective gasp of incredulity rippled through the room as one of the engineers, summoning a rare courage, declared, "Colonel, that's impossible." LeMay's retort was swift and unyielding, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "Then you better work with utmost speed," he countered, "because in exactly 30 days, I am slated to launch a massive bombing campaign against Japan with 500 B-29s, and I absolutely require engines that will not succumb to catastrophic failure and burn up over the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. Sergeant Valador has unequivocally demonstrated the solution. Now, it is incumbent upon you to execute your professional responsibilities and implement it without delay." A profound silence descended upon the room, broken only by LeMay's turn towards Tony Valador. "Sergeant," he commanded, his voice softening slightly, "you will remain stationed at right field, serving as a vital technical consultant. These gentlemen will undoubtedly have numerous inquiries regarding the intricacies of your modification. It is your duty to provide them with comprehensive answers." "Yes, sir," Tony replied simply. As LeMay strode towards the exit, he paused, turning back to offer a final, sagacious piece of advice to the young sergeant. "And, Sergeant, do not permit these highly educated engineers to overcomplicate this matter. Sometimes the most effective and elegant solution is, in fact, the simplest one. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic." On October 15, 1944, at the bustling Wright Field testing facility, Sergeant Valador's revolutionary modification embarked upon an unparalleled journey of scrutiny, undergoing what was then considered the most intensive testing regimen in the annals of aviation history. The diligent engineers from Wright Aeronautical meticulously dismantled his seemingly crude, yet remarkably effective, hand-fabricated ducts. Through a painstaking process of reverse engineering, they painstakingly deciphered the underlying principles of his design, translating his intuitive craftsmanship into precise and comprehensive technical drawings, a crucial step towards mass production. Their rigorous evaluation extended to the cutting edge of wartime technology, employing computational fluid dynamics analyses that, while appearing rudimentary by today's advanced standards, represented the absolute zenith of scientific inquiry for 1944. To ensure an exhaustive data collection, calibrated thermocouples were strategically installed at no fewer than 36 distinct measurement points throughout the engine's intricate architecture. The testing protocol itself was nothing short of brutal. Each engine was compelled to operate at its maximum power setting for a grueling 2 hours continuously. This duration was deliberately chosen to be twice as long as any B-29 would realistically maintain peak power during actual combat operations, pushing the engines far beyond their expected limits. Every conceivable parameter, every subtle fluctuation in temperature, every shift in pressure, every minute vibration frequency was meticulously monitored and recorded, leaving no aspect of performance unexamined. The revelation of the test results sent shockwaves of astonishment through the entire engineering team. The baseline R3350 engine, devoid of any modification, exhibited alarming thermal characteristics. Its front cylinders registered an average temperature of 410 degree Gauss, while the rear cylinders soared to a perilous average of 565 degree Gauss, peaking at a critical 620 degree Gauss. Under these extreme conditions, exhaust valve failure, a common and catastrophic problem, typically occurred after a mere 73 minutes of full power operation. In stark contrast, the modified R3350, now equipped with Validor's innovative ducts, demonstrated a truly transformative improvement. The front cylinder temperatures remained stable at an average of 415 degrees, but the rear cylinders, previously a major vulnerability, now consistently ran at a remarkably cooler average of 445 degrees, with peak temperatures never exceeding 478 degrees. Most significantly, during the entire 180-minute test duration at full power, not a single instance of exhaust valve failure was observed, an unprecedented triumph for engine reliability. The data unequivocally showed that the problematic rear cylinders were now operating a staggering 120 degrees cooler than before. The critical temperature differential between the front and rear cylinders, which previously stood at a concerning 155 degrees, had been dramatically reduced to a mere 30 degrees, indicating a vastly more balanced and efficient cooling profile. Dr. Evans, a leading expert from Wright Aeronautical, initially convinced there must be some computational error, meticulously reran the numbers 3 separate times, only to confirm the veracity of the astonishing figures. Puzzled by the seemingly counterintuitive outcome, he directly questioned Tony. How is this truly possible? The ducts, by design, actually reduce the total cooling airflow by approximately 8%. You are, in essence, moving less air, yet achieving demonstrably superior cooling performance. Tony, with a characteristic shrug, offered a pragmatic explanation. It's not merely about the sheer volume of air. It's fundamentally about precisely directing that air to where it is most critically needed. Those rear cylinders were previously receiving virtually no effective airflow whatsoever. The air was simply taking the path of least resistance, bypassing them entirely by flowing over the top of the cowling. My ducts, however, compel the air to venture into areas where it would not naturally gravitate. Dr. Evans, still grappling with the concept, interjected, but that directly violates the established principle of minimizing flow restriction within an air system. Tony, respectfully acknowledging the theoretical framework, replied, "No offense intended, sir, but I confess I don't fully comprehend the intricacies of that particular principle. What I do understand, from my experience in plumbing, is that sometimes you need to intentionally restrict flow in one specific location to effectively create and redirect pressure in another. It's essentially the very same fundamental idea at play here." For several days, the dedicated engineers meticulously toiled, attempting to further refine and optimize Tony's inherently simple design. They experimented with a myriad of variations, different duct diameters, alternative materials, and various routing paths, hoping to eke out additional performance. Yet, despite their exhaustive efforts and advanced methodologies, nothing they devised proved more effective or efficient than Tony's original, straightforward concept. Finally, on October 28, 1944, Colonel Curtis LeMay, recognizing the undeniable success and the pressing strategic need, gave his official approval for the emergency implementation of the Validor system. The technical drawings were promptly dispatched, arriving at Boeing South facilities on October 30th. With remarkable speed, Boeing had successfully retooled their entire production line by November 15th, incorporating the vital cooling ducts into every new B-29. These ducts were officially designated the Validor Bypass Cooling System in all technical manuals, though, in a testament to their inventor's practical genius, air crews universally adopted the simpler, more affectionate moniker, Tony Ducts. November 24th, 1944. Against the backdrop of Saipan in the Mariana Islands, the first contingent of B-29s, now proudly equipped with Tony Valador's groundbreaking modification, made their arrival in the Pacific Theater. These formidable aircraft were immediately assigned to the elite 73rd Bombardment Wing, operating under the direct and discerning command of General Curtis LeMay himself. It was Captain Robert Fitzgerald, piloting the B-29 christened City of Los Angeles, who had the distinct honor of undertaking the inaugural combat test of this crucial modification. His mission, a perilous bombing raid targeting the vital Musashino aircraft plant, situated perilously close to the bustling metropolis of Tokyo. The parameters of this particular mission were, by all accounts, a veritable nightmare for engine cooling systems. The aircraft faced an arduous 3,000-mile round trip, demanding approximately 9 hours of sustained operation at high power settings. The mission profile encompassed a protracted overwater flight, an energy-intensive climb to a dizzying altitude of 32,000 feet, followed by hours of maintaining consistent cruise power. This combination of factors presented the perfect, most challenging scenario for inducing engine overheating, a persistent and often catastrophic issue for the B-29 fleet. Technical Sergeant Mike Romano, Fitzgerald's flight engineer, monitored the intricate array of engine instruments with an almost obsessive vigilance. He carried the heavy burden of personal experience prior to the implementation of Tony's modification. The No. 3 enginee, the right inboard unit, was notoriously the first to manifest critical temperature problems. Romano's personal logbook bore witness to 3 harrowing engine fires he had personally endured. He was intimately familiar with the insidious warning signs, rear cylinder temperatures inexorably climbing above 550 degrees, the subtle yet alarming fluctuation in oil pressure, and the telltale spiking of exhaust gas temperatures. Approximately 2 hours into the demanding mission, Romano's eyes fixed on the No. 3 engine's rear cylinder gauge. It displayed an astonishing 438 degrees. The front cylinders, meanwhile, read 421 degrees. Disbelief etched across his face, Romano checked the gauge again, tapped it sharply, and then meticulously verified the circuit breaker, convinced of a malfunction. "Captain," he announced, his voice laced with confusion, "I believe we have a faulty temperature gauge on No. 3. "What's it indicating?" Fitzgerald inquired. "Rear cylinders are showing 438. That's simply impossible. We've been at sustained cruise power for 2 hours now." Fitzgerald quickly glanced at his own instrument panel, noting that all other engines were registering normal operational temperatures. "You're suggesting that No. 3 is actually running hot and the gauge is erroneously misleading us?" he pressed. "No, sir," Romano responded, shaking his head. "I actually think it's running cool. But that, frankly, makes absolutely no logical sense under these conditions." Despite their initial bewilderment, they pressed on, successfully completing the entirety of the 9-hour mission. This particular flight marked the longest duration Fitzgerald had ever managed to keep a B-29 operating at sustained high power. Throughout the grueling journey, the No. 3 engine's rear cylinders never once exceeded a remarkable 455 degree 5. Upon their safe return to Saipan, Romano immediately conducted a thorough inspection of the engine. To his astonishment, there were no discernible signs of heat stress, no telltale discoloration, and the cooling fins appeared as pristine as if they had just emerged from the factory. He promptly sought out the crew chief, His curiosity piqued. "What exactly is different about number 3?" he asked. The crew chief, with a knowing grin, replied, "It's got the new cooling modification. Some mechanic invented it. They're calling them Tony Ducks." Over the subsequent 3 weeks, an overwhelming tide of compelling operational data began to pour in, painting an undeniable picture of transformation. The statistics from the pre-modification period, September-October 1944, had been starkly grim. B-29 engine fires occurred at an alarming rate of 4.2 per 100 flight hours. A significant 18% of engines required premature replacement due to irreparable thermal damage, and a distressing 31% of missions were aborted due to engine-related mechanical failures. However, the post-modification period, December 1944 to February 1945, revealed a dramatic and truly revolutionary improvement. B-29 engine fires plummeted to a mere 0.7 per 100 flight hours. Engines requiring early replacement due to thermal damage dropped to a negligible 3%, and engine-related mission aborts were drastically reduced to just 6%. This remarkable data unequivocally demonstrated that Tony Validor, simple yet profound modification, had succeeded in reducing engine fires by an astounding 83%. By March 1945, the widespread adoption of the Validor cooling system was complete, with Boeing having retrofitted more than 2,100 B-29s across the fleet. Concurrently, Wright Aeronautical seamlessly integrated this essential modification into every new R-3350 engine rolling off their production lines. The overarching impact of this innovation was nothing short of staggering. Prior to its implementation, the 20th Air Force was grappling with an unsustainable loss rate, approximately 22 B-29s per month, succumbing to engine fires and associated mechanical malfunctions. Following the modification, this catastrophic figure plummeted to a mere 4 aircraft per month. A conservative estimation suggests that Tony Validor's ingenious cooling ducts were directly responsible for saving an estimated 216 B-29s over the final 12 months of the war. Given an average crew complement of 11 members per aircraft, this translates to a profound saving of 2,376 American lives. Beyond the immediate preservation of personnel and material, the broader strategic ramifications were immense. With the newfound reliability of their engines, B-29s could consistently maintain the relentless bombing campaign against Japan without crippling interruptions. Pivotal operations, such as the devastating firebombing of Tokyo, the systematic destruction of Japanese war industries, and ultimately the epoch-making atomic bomb missions to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, none of these critical events could have been executed without B-29s possessing the unwavering capability to fly 3,000-mile missions without their engines succumbing to fire. From the Japanese perspective, the transformation was equally profound. Post-war analyses of captured Japanese Army Air Force documents unveiled their evolving assessment of the B-29 threat. Lieutenant General Torishiro Kawabe, who served as the deputy chief of the Imperial Japanese Army General Staff, meticulously recorded his observations in his personal diary. He noted that in the autumn of 1944, the Japanese High Command genuinely believed the B-29 program was on the precipice of failure. Their intelligence reports consistently highlighted the inherent unreliability of the B-29's engines and indicated exceptionally high mechanical loss rates. Based on these assessments, they confidently calculated that the Americans would be unable to sustain their bombing operations. However, as Kawabe lamented, then in December 1944 everything changed. He observed a dramatic shift. The B-29s began appearing in significantly greater numbers, undertaking missions of extended duration, and critically, their engines no longer failed with alarming frequency over Japanese territory. It was at this juncture, he concluded, that they unequivocally realized they had irrevocably lost the air war. Captain Saburo Sakai, a renowned Japanese fighter pilot, later recounted his personal experience, stating, "We feared the B-29 not primarily for the destructive power of its weapons, but for its newfound, unwavering reliability." Earlier in 1944, we would occasionally witness them losing engines, falling out of formation, and becoming vulnerable targets. However, after late 1944, they flew in perfectly disciplined formations for hours on end. Their engines never faltered. We knew, with chilling certainty, that we could not prevail against such formidable machines. In essence, Tony Valador, remarkably simple, yet profoundly insightful engineering solution not only directly saved the lives of thousands of brave servicemen, but also irrevocably altered the very course and ultimate outcome of the Second World War. By June 1945, with the conflict in Europe concluded, and Japan mere weeks away from its inevitable surrender, Tony Valador found himself undergoing the administrative process for discharge, preparing to transition back to the rhythms of civilian life. Before his departure from Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, a formal attempt was made to bestow upon him a medal, the Army Commendation Medal, recognizing his exceptional technical innovation that had so significantly contributed to the Allied war effort. However, with characteristic humility, Tony politely declined the prestigious honor. "I didn't do anything particularly special," he explained to the astonished colonel, who was poised to pin the medal onto his uniform. "I merely fixed a cooling problem. That is, after all, simply what mechanics are trained to do." The colonel, determined to impress upon him the true magnitude of his contribution, countered, "Sergeant, your ingenious modification saved in excess of 200 aircraft, and by extension thousands of lives." Tony, unwavering in his modest perspective, responded, "Then, with all due respect, sir, the medal should rightly be given to the brave crews who flew those perilous missions. They are the genuine heroes." I merely installed some aluminum pipes. The colonel, momentarily stunned by such profound humility, reiterated, "Sergeant, you truly do not comprehend the monumental impact of your actions." Tony, maintaining his calm demeanor, offered a final, insightful perspective. "With the utmost respect, sir, I believe I understand perfectly. The engineers meticulously figured out how to design and construct the engine. The pilots skillfully figured out how to fly it, and I, in my role, figured out how to keep it cool. We all simply performed our respective duties. That, in essence, is all there is to it. We simply executed our assigned duties. That was the extent of it." Such was the modest declaration from Tony upon his reintegration into civilian life. He subsequently returned to Cleveland, resuming his trade as a plumber, and steadfastly refrained from ever mentioning his wartime contributions to any of his clientele. It was not until 1947 that a tenacious reporter from the Cleveland Plain Dealer unearthed the remarkable narrative. A local tradesman, a plumber by profession, whose ingenuity had single-handedly salvaged the critical B-29 bomber initiative. Eager to compose a compelling feature article, the journalist sought an interview with Tony, who, true to his unassuming nature, politely but firmly declined. "I have no desire for public notoriety," he asserted. "I merely performed my job. There is absolutely nothing more to elaborate on." Undeterred, by Tony's lack of cooperation, the reporter proceeded to pen the article, which subsequently appeared under the headline, Cleveland Plumber's Simple Idea Solved B-29 Crisis. The piece was published on page 7 of the newspaper, and consequently, its profound significance largely escaped the attention of the general populace. The enduring technical legacy of Tony Validor's ingenious bypass cooling concept proved to be nothing short of revolutionary, swiftly becoming a foundational standard in the intricate realm of aircraft engine design. Today's sophisticated turbofan engines, marvels of modern engineering, integrate highly evolved iterations of this very principle, employing dedicated cooling ducts meticulously engineered to channel airflow precisely where it is most critically required, rather than relying on the less efficient mechanisms of natural convection. For instance, the formidable Pratt & Whitney F-135 engine, which propels the advanced F-35 Lightning II fighter jet, incorporates cutting-edge bypass cooling technology. Similarly, the General Electric GE9X, widely recognized as the world's most powerful jet engine, embeds these fundamental bypass cooling tenets within its elaborate thermal management infrastructure. While contemporary aviation engineers refer to this vital methodology as directed cooling or forced path cooling, history, unfortunately, has neglected to immortalize Tony's name by formally designating it the Validor system. Yet the core principle, elegantly simple and profoundly effective, persists when a fluid exhibits a reluctance to flow naturally to its intended destination. The pragmatic solution lies in constructing a purpose-built, dedicated conduit. In essence, it remains a fundamental exercise in plumbing, pure and unadulterated. We invite you to stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Please feel free to share a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The statistical data unequivocally underscores the profound impact of Validor's innovation. Of the total 3,970 B-29s manufactured, a mere 147 were tragically lost due to direct enemy engagement in combat operations. However, a far more alarming figure emerged from pre-modification data. A staggering 267 B-29s were lost to catastrophic engine fires and other mechanical malfunctions, highlighting a critical vulnerability in the aircraft's design. It is estimated that the implementation of the Validor cooling system directly prevented the loss of an additional 216 B-29 aircraft. More importantly, this intervention is credited with saving an estimated 2,376 invaluable crew lives, a testament to the life-saving efficacy of his solution. Furthermore, the sheer scale of its adoption is evident in the production numbers, with over 18,000 R3350 engines ultimately manufactured, incorporating the crucial Validor modification. In contemporary aerospace, the influence of Tony's cooling principle is pervasive, with its descendants now integral to virtually every aircraft equipped with air-cooled engines. From the ubiquitous Cessna 172s, a staple of general aviation, to the sophisticated Boeing 787 Dreamliners that traverse global skies, the fundamental concept of dedicated cooling paths forms the bedrock of effective engine thermal management. This innovative approach extends beyond atmospheric flight. Even NASA's advanced thermal management systems for spacecraft leverage similar bypass cooling principles. The intricate cooling loops aboard the International Space Station, for instance, employ a directed flow cooling methodology that Tony, with his innate understanding of fluid dynamics, would instantly recognize and appreciate, illustrating the timeless applicability of his foundational insight. Tony Valador passed away in 1982 at the age of 76, having remained an active plumber throughout his life. His obituary in The Cleveland Plain Dealer, while acknowledging his service as an aircraft mechanic during World War II, conspicuously omitted any mention of his pivotal role in the B-29 program, and tragically made no reference to the 2,376 lives his invention had saved. During his funeral service, a lone mourner, an unfamiliar man in his 60s, stood silently at the rear of the chapel. Following the ceremony, he approached Tony's son. "I piloted B-29s across the Pacific," the veteran recounted, completing 35 missions. "My entire crew returned home safely because our engines never succumbed to fire. Although I never had the privilege of knowing your father personally, I have spent 4 decades endeavoring to locate the mechanic responsible for inventing those crucial cooling ducts. I simply wish to convey my profound gratitude." Tony's son, visibly perplexed, responded, "My father never spoke of inventing anything. He consistently maintained that he was nothing more than a plumber." A wistful smile touched the veteran's lips. That indeed sounds precisely like the kind of man who would save over 2,000 lives and never perceive it as a monumental achievement. The ultimate revelation here is that groundbreaking innovations do not always originate from highly credentialed experts possessing advanced academic degrees. Occasionally, they emerge from the practical wisdom of individuals who have spent years engaged in hands-on work, such as running pipes through countless Cleveland basements, and who thus grasped one profoundly simple truth: fluid inherently seeks the path of least resistance. Consequently, if one requires flow to occur in an alternative location, the solution is to construct a superior, more direct pathway for it. Tony Valador was neither a proclaimed genius nor a celebrated hero in the conventional sense. He was fundamentally a plumber who, when confronted with the complex mechanics of an aircraft engine, perceived it through the lens of a familiar plumbing challenge. And that distinct perspective ultimately made an unparalleled difference.